Hey guys, how are you doing this week?
Good morning.
Hey, Robin, doing great. Good to see you.
Good to see you guys too.
70 degrees today in Baltimore.
I know I'm getting really spoiled with the weather. I don't know what I'm gonna do when I have to break out my winter coat.
I know.
Well, that
I know
makes it
sets.
84 here in Florida, so it's warm.
Yeah,
It's warm here.
Florida is boring. Florida is boring. But Saturday morning for Graham's soccer game, 40, 40, mid 40s. So
Oh
it's
my
gonna be
gosh.
it's gonna be cool.
Ouch.
It's gonna be
Dealing
a
with
little
frost.
frigid.
Yep, yep. But it'd be fun. It's better than playing in 85 degrees, and
Yeah, all right.
soccer's meant for those crisp mornings. So, so the topic for today, we're running into a decent amount with clients on interest rates, basically, and the high interest savings accounts, the or money market accounts paying 5+%, and whether you stick a bunch of money into those because of the yield is so high, or do we invest in other areas? And there was a term brought up by Joe, which I loved, is do you want to rent the interest rate or do you want to buy the interest rate?
I
And
love
which I love, and I'm going to continue to use it with Joe's permission
that.
to use that quote. But essentially, what that means from what I took from it is if you put money in high yield savings money market account, you're renting the rate because it's based on what the Fed does, what the banks, how they change the interest that they're paying on those accounts. And maybe it's around for a while, maybe it's not, we don't know. So that you compare to buying the interest rate via a bond, via a treasury bill, via a multi-year guaranteed annuity, seed certificate of deposit. Those are the different types of decisions that you can buy the interest rate for that period of time. So, Nav, have you understood that, or do you have any other nuances with this rent versus buy?
Yeah, yeah. And I think of it the same way as a housing market. When you rent a home, you're at the subject of the landlord. You rent an apartment, you're at the subject of somebody else dictating what your cost is going to be the next year once the lease is up. Um, that's the same way with a high yield savings account or a money market. You're at the mercy of the market itself because markets do change. They always have. And the last time we had high interest rates where high yield savings were paying over 3% was 2019. And we were telling clients, hey, make sure you're getting money on your cash because it's important that you get paid fairly on deposits in the bank. And then 1 year later, less than a year later, 2020 hit, rates dropped to 0%. High yield savings were was paying 0.5. So that's what happens when you rent versus owning or buying an interest rate is that you are subject to the movement of the market. Eventually, you will also be subject to the movement of the market once your CD is up or once the bond matures or the multi-year guaranteed annuity matures. But you've locked in that rate, you know what you're gonna earn on it. It's guaranteed. So that does help plan. And we don't know where interest rates going to go from here. It could be higher, could be lower. But given where we are now, we tend to think it's either going to stay somewhere steady or maybe drop a bit. And if it does go higher, we don't think it's going to be another 5% move up. So locking in some higher rates now could make a lot of sense. And you can do that through buying bonds through your investment account that are held till maturity versus just doing in a bond fund, which is somewhat subject to market movement, but there's other benefits to that when you buy it in a bond fund. So, Greg, I'll let you speak to that a little bit.
Before Greg starts, I kind of just wanted to know, so what would be the
Mhm.
reason that a client would go more towards renting it versus buying it? Because I
Oh,
know there are pros and cons to both. So
Absolutely. Great question.
great question, Robin. I like that. So conceptually, the way that I describe that or answer the question is I'm going to relate it to real estate. So we've had these questions come up about, hey, Nav, Greg, Joe, Skylar, should we rent our next house or should we buy our next house? And the concept behind the recommendation is going to be the costs associated with buying versus renting, when 100% of those dollars are going to go towards, you know, the landlord, whoever owns the property. So you're not receiving any asset every single month when you pay rent. So the benefit of buying a home is a portion of that monthly payment via a mortgage goes towards interest and a portion goes towards principal. So buying a house is a smarter move, generally speaking, when you're going to stay long enough to offset the costs, realtor fees, taxes, settlement, you know, with everything that's involved in settlement costs. It makes more sense to buy. So that is the concept that I would use on when would you rent. So if you need your money, whatever pocket of money that we're discussing, over the next 1, 2, maybe even 3 years, it would make sense to rent that interest rate. So then you're not locking in for 5-year CD, 5-year multi-year guaranteed annuity, 5-year treasury, etc. And you need your money in year 2 or year 3. Well, now you're subject to penalties to pull that money out. So that would be how I would answer that question, is when do you rent and when would that be a good decision versus buying the interest rate?
Okay, that makes sense. So
And
essentially,
now what
capital you don't want to buy.
right.
Exactly.
And Nav, what about any insight on, if we're using that, just because I brought up real estate, the break even time period on when buying a house would be more advantageous than renting a house?
Yeah, the conventional wisdom is if you're going to live somewhere for 5 years, that generally gives you enough time to take advantage of owning a home, building some equity, paying down principal instead of giving that money that you're going to be paying somewhere to live to the landlord. If you're looking at current year markets, interest rates, housing prices, it was just put out that the average break even now is 13.3 years. So that shows just how expensive our real estate market is currently. So it's a harder decision now when it comes to, do I buy, do I rent? How long do I want to be in a certain place? So we'll gladly talk through those decisions, but it is market dependent. But I still think, hey, if you're going to be somewhere for 5 years, you don't want to just be putting money to somebody, giving somebody else the money. It can really make sense to own a home. Same conversation with interest rates and putting your money somewhere where, hey, you want to be able to access it. And that's usually 1 to 2 years. If you're going to need it in 2-year time, the high yield savings account's a great place to do it. A money market account's a great place to do it. You give up a little bit on the upside, but you keep the flexibility. But if you're saying, hey, I just want to make sure I'm safe, I'm getting guaranteed interest, and I'm not going to need this money for a while, looking at those multi-year CDs or annuities or bonds really does make sense.
Yeah, one other thing, Nav, that you brought up in reference to bonds would be not just locking in the current interest rate, you know, after you decide on the maturity and how long you want to keep it in that bond. But the other variable to that is bond values appreciating, or their appreciation potential if interest rates fall in the future. So that would be another benefit to the bond buying the interest rate, would be you have that other variable of the bond value increasing. So you would get the yield plus the potential appreciation on the bond price if interest rates go down in the future. So, you know, that coupled with, I had a client example where he had a target percent that he could make on his money. And when he reached that, he wanted to, whether it's eliminate risk or really, really suppress the risk in his portfolio. And I recently had a phone call, and he referenced, "Aren't we done?" And I
He's like,
said
I've
the way
gotten where
that,
I wanted to get.
right. I responded basically saying, well, if we take a snapshot in time today, yes, but you have a lot longer to live.
Right.
What happens when we can't lock in this rate for as long as your life expectancy is telling us? So we still have that longevity risk, inflation risk of locking everything in now, which what it seemed to be the right answer that he was looking for in that, you know, at that time. So that coupled with the bond value increase that I just mentioned, that would be the reason, another reason to buy interest rates rather than renting, and just leaving all your money in the high yield savings.
Absolutely. We just came from one of the fastest rate hiking cycles in our history, which also means we had the worst price performance from bonds in our history. Going forward, the likelihood is we're at, you know, multi-year highs in rates. If something were to happen, a recession hits, or something unforeseen happens, the likely move is the Fed cuts rates start to drop a bit, and bond prices increase. So you're getting the yield and you're getting price appreciation. So that's why we like a balanced approach to both bond investing and to asset allocation as a whole, because there will always be something that works and always something that doesn't, because that's just how our investment markets work. So diversification is always good, with both, you know, high yield savings, some longer termed buying of interest rates, and also investing in bonds that do move with markets while you're getting paid to wait.
Yeah.
Do we have a lot of clients that typically choose bonds that move with the market?
Typically, I would say that's how we set up our liquid portfolios, our investment management portfolios, is a mix of bonds that are invested in bond mutual funds or ETFs, along with stock mutual funds and ETFs, and those asset allocation based on clients' risk tolerance, goals, time horizon. That all comes into play with how much stocks they have versus how much bonds, how much risk versus reward, and that all comes into play. And it's something that we certainly enjoy doing, and having those conversations.
All right. Well, I don't know if we can expand upon that topic any longer. This has been a great conversation, and I know it's going to be more and more part of the conversations with our clients while interest rates are this high. And also considering last year, if we're looking at what the returns of client portfolios were last year when bonds had historic downturn, with that rapid rise in interest rates, like you mentioned, Nav, and then the stock market not playing nice either, it's very hard to see cash paying 5+% and looking at your portfolio returns in 2022. So we just have to stay with, look at history. Let's use an average of what stock prices have done, what bond prices have done over time, rather than isolating 2022.
Yes.
When planning for the future is very, very important. We can't lose sight of that.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, it was nice talking to you guys.
Yes. Enjoy the
Always a
70-degree
pleasure.
weather and 84-degree weather in Florida.
Yes.
Have
Will
a
do.
great day.
All
Thanks,
right.
guys.
Have a good one.